is already here. I might be having some technical challenges, so please write on the chat if Nathalie is already visible and if you can hear her.
I can hear you. I'm just wondering if you can hear me. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to meet with you again after a long time. I was sent to Switzerland, and I'm talking from here to you, and I'll be talking about the question of knowing if COVID-19 is an opportunity for African sovereignty. The global competition that had already started before the outbreak of the pandemic has been reaffirmed by COVID-19. Big countries are fighting to reposition themselves. We are in the situation described by Thucydides in the history of the Peloponnesian War. You have an hegemonic will of a dominant power that trigger clashes with a rising power, leading to two outcomes. Either the established power makes room for the emerging power through negotiation, or there is war. What should be the posture of the African countries facing this trap? Do they have an interest in choosing a side as they did in the Cold War era when they proclaimed themselves non-aligned, despite being factually aligned on one bloc or the other? We all remember that Houphouët-Boigny was aligned on Kennedy and Sékou Touré on Khrushchev. Or is it in their best interest to open up to all the camps, knowing that this choice will have economic, financial, social, and geopolitical consequences? Well, let's start. In addition to the health crisis, COVID-19 has sparked a public outcry in the developed world, where people have been astonished that their big countries did not have the ability to produce such simple things as masks, vents, swabs, gloves, antibiotics, and that a Chinese-style Marshall Plan was put in place to help them and save them. Another interesting observation: during the 2016 US presidential campaign, when Donald Trump said America first, he was mocked by his opponents and the Europeans for what they called a retrograde and protectionist speech. Today, with COVID-19, everyone agrees with him. We have seen European countries hijack and steal masks, drugs, ventilators from each other, each saying, "Me first, my country first." Since the end of the Cold War, the world has been characterized by intense trade flows. Before COVID, Adam Smith's doctrine taught us that we must do what we do best at home, let others do what they do best at home, and then trade so everyone wins. The more you trade with others, the richer you are. In this perspective, the foreigner is seen as an opportunity. But some countries are now starting to say that the foreigners or the partner can also be an adversary or an enemy, as COVID has brutally shown. Whether it is Germany, France, Italy, England, etc., everyone is talking today about repatriating their foreign-based industries so that in the future, they don't have to depend on anyone anymore. But if European or American industries relocate to their territories, what will happen to Africa? As our continent is having no industries to repatriate, but is rather seeking to benefit from the relocation of foreign industries. Will the multinational established in Africa shut down in the near future? Or should African countries nationalize those companies because they also, understandably, don't want to depend further on the goodwill of foreigners? Africa has often experienced the harms of the dependency. Francophone Africa has yet to recover from the economic crisis they have faced since France unilaterally decided to devaluate the CFA franc in 1994. And the people of Côte d'Ivoire tremendously suffered when France declared an embargo on medicines, or when French banks closed overnight, kidnapping the assets of their Ivorian clients during the 2010 post-election crisis. But since the new COVID paradigm now recognizes dependency as an element of economic weakness, Africans must take advantage of this rhetoric to refuse that the price, the quantity and quality of their natural resources depend on other countries. They must decide to mainly enter into partnership with people who are able to manufacture the end product in Africa and sell it to the world. So will Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana, for example, inform the West that from now on, cocoa will no longer be exported, but that companies wishing to offer chocolate to their European customers will have to open factories on site and produce chocolate in Azagye and Accra, rather than exporting timber that will be processed elsewhere for sale? IKEA furniture should be manufactured in Libreville and Dakar. You want iron? You want cobalt? We create the steel industry in Bamako and the battery factories in Lumumbashi. Oil is to be pumped and refined in Kaduna, in Luanda, in Limbe, and then sold to the world. In case of a crisis, we have the finished product locally. On another front, since the 2008 financial crisis, the dollar and the euro have been in serious problems which could not be resolved by the quantitative easing. COVID-19 has seen a breakdown of solidarity within Europe, and even with regards to the European Economic Response Plan, there are significant divisions within the Eurozone. On the one hand, countries like France, Italy, Spain favor the Corona bonds option, and on the other hand, those like Austria and the Netherlands are firmly rebutting the mutualization of debt. Meanwhile, China and Russia have been working on their financing schemes for a long time. Will African countries seize advantage of the situation to take control of their currencies, central banks, financial markets, incoming flows, interest rates, exchange rates, or will they let this continue to be defined at the desires of France, Europe, the USA, or China? As financial markets refocus on national economies, does this not give African countries an opportunity to work on their monetary integration and create their own Wall Street or city? Is it not the time to accelerate the break with the colonial powers and the end of the CFA franc by learning from the failure of the Eurozone and by favoring the option of the common currency rather than that of the single currency within ECOWAS and ECAS? Will African leaders abandon the humiliating begging for the cancelling or rescheduling of debts and demand implementation of the 2013 African Development Bank Global Financial Integrity Plan to combat corruption and illicit capital flight? On the last part that I want to touch base today, we noticed that during the pandemic, as always, copying what others do, African leaders found themselves imposing lockdowns and curfews and promising to provide assistance to the most vulnerable population of their respective countries, who are usually peasants. But in Africa, there is nothing of the social system that allowed the Western and Asian states to better manage this aspect of the crisis. They just distributed rice and oil, but no one wonders what people are eating ever since they were given 3 kilos of rice and a bottle of oil in April for a crisis that started in March and that is still ongoing. Now is the time to ask ourselves about our ability to improve the agricultural production system so that even when ports, airports, borders are closed for a long time, when international trade is stopped, there is no disruption in the supply of food and essential goods. If agricultural countries like ours had developed the production of rice, of bananas, of cassavas, of corns, of yams, of products we actually eat in Africa, we would be less subject to foreign dictates. To achieve this, it is very urgent that we proceed with the land reform, public hearings, cadastre, registration of plots, free distribution of land titles to the population, and creation of stock exchanges. So in conclusion, instead of falling into the Cold War trap, where it was necessary to be pro-American or pro-Russian, we can only hope that African people finally realize that with COVID-19, we just need to be pro ourselves and take advantage of all the opportunities offered to us by all sides. It is time for the African people to impose at the top of their countries politicians who have the will to conquer the sovereignty that will lead to social progress on the continent by ending imprisonment in unfair international trade and treaties due to the senseless agreements that some of our past and current leaders have signed, such as ACP, EPA, World Trade Organization, CFA franc, by also moving away from the extroverted rent economy that is ineffective for our real needs. And last but not least, by putting an end to the lack of cooperation within ECOWAS and ECAS, which is our new horizon, if we want to successfully get out of the impoverishing, alienating, and hostile face-to-face with France and other colonial powers. Thank you very much for giving me that time to speak.
Thank you. Thank you, Nathalie. You're posing very sharp and very interesting questions as always, but I have one for you as well. This issue that you touched upon, the CFA franc and the reform that was scheduled pretty much for this summer, right? I mean, I do understand that the plan was changed quite a lot because of the pandemic. But what is currently happening? I mean, is there any information available in the public space? Because as far as I understand, some big announcements were supposed to be made at the beginning of June at the France-Africa summit, and now that everything is quite different, what is happening behind the scenes? Do we have any information about it? Is there anything available in the public space? Because all that we could see was that, if I'm not mistaken, Nigeria and Liberia were making some announcements saying that they don't seem to like this plan of ECHO. So what are the updates?
Thank you for asking, Joe. Actually, there's nothing new. I mean, we can only be happy that due to COVID, this France-Afrique summit that was scheduled in Bordeaux has been postponed, I think, until the end of the year or early next year. What you need to know is that the recent announcement made by France are actually a big bunch of lies. France is actually trying to kidnap the project that was developed by ECOWAS to create a single currency in the economic community. And they started that project decades ago. And they decided they are going to call this single currency ECO, like ECOWAS, the beginning of ECOWAS. And because of the pressure of the African people, of the public opinion in Africa and everywhere against the CFA franc, because the focus that was put on that also after Sochi, which led to me being expelled from Ivory Coast, because of this tremendous pressure that has been put on this colonial currency, France has just decided that, okay, let's keep the mechanism in place, but change the name of the currency. And so that's what they announced at the end of last year in Abidjan. And a few people, very naive, thought, oh, that means that the CFA is over and that now the ECHO is going to be launched. But the ECHO is not going to be launched anytime soon, because the ECHO is the project of the ECOWAS. And as you rightly said, Nigeria, Ghana, Liberia, the non-Francophone countries in ECOWAS are not accepting the system of having a currency linked to the euro. And not having the flexibility to decide and manage their own currency. And what Macron and the Francophone heads of states want to do is actually to kidnap the name of the ECO, but maintain the main principles of the CFA, and pretend to the public opinion that, okay, let's see, we have abandoned the CFA. They have not abandoned the CFA, Julia. The break with the CFA will be something that is announced by African heads of states. It's not going to be announced by Emmanuel Macron or any upcoming president in France. So there's no further big announcement to expect. We now, thanks to COVID-19, we have a little break from this cinema that Macron and his lackeys have organized since the end of last year. There's not going to be any improvement on the field of the single currency in anytime soon. And the problem, and that's what I was touching base in my speech before, it's like you have these convergence criteria that have been set up by ECOWAS itself in order to say, okay, before we move forward to the ECO, we need to have some convergence criteria where every country is reaching them. And as of now, none of them have reached those criteria. That's why I'm suggesting that we set the single currency as the final objectives, but we actually start with a common currency where each country is having its own currency, and then ping it to the ECO, and then as going forward, we move forward.
Yeah, that would definitely imply quite a lot of complications with exchange rates and everything, because the way CFA works right now eliminates all the possibility for free trade and like real evaluation of the economy. So, well, this path, I mean, hopefully this COVID situation has actually provided some positive changes in terms of perception and in terms of, putting this plan aside for a while. But, from history, we already know that it's a very dangerous path to be talking about Pan-African, let's say, currency. And I assume the last leader who was very loud and in talking about it was Gaddafi, and we all know what happened to him, unfortunately. So, but another little question, just a brief one. Do you think that this pandemic has created conditions for the citizens themselves to reflect over the situation within African countries and their international relations? I mean, when everyone went on lockdown and when the pandemic happened, we're seeing with the numbers in some of the African countries, strict lockdowns would occur when they had 50 or let's say 100 cases. So do you think, I mean, I do understand that you're not in Africa right now, but since you're in touch and you have a huge network, what is your sentiment about it? What is your feeling about it? Do you think COVID made people ask more questions and go into issues they have not been thinking about much, or do you think it had people focusing on other issues like, well, survival has been a topical issue for everyone, I assume?
I think that people themselves the raw truth about what their governments had been doing. I mean, we are all very happy that the figures did not go up as the rest of the world was expected or wishing sometimes for Africa. But I think it showed how unprepared and how unprepared the governments was. And you were talking about the lockdowns and the curfews, but people actually started to auto lock down themselves before the governments actually started addicting some measures, because of the global connections that we have. And even in Africa, you are on the internet, you watch TV, you see that, oh, it's happening in China and now it's happening in Europe. And what are our people here doing? Nobody is doing anything. And then it comes that it's a disease where you need to have ventilators and respiratory that release respiratory problems. And we know that a country like Central African Republic is having 3 ventilators for a whole country. 3. Same in Cote d'Ivoire, in Ghana, everywhere. So everybody was actually looking at it and seeing, okay, our governments for the past years, for the past decades, they have every year praised the investment that they made into the health system, into this, into that, into the infrastructures. And COVID came and showed that nothing was real. It was just announcements, it was just fake, it was lies for the most part. And I think we are very, very lucky that African people actually started to thinking, okay, let's not count on them and let's take care of ourselves. Let's protect ourselves, because those governments are not going to help us in any way. And I don't know, I'm not a physician, I'm not a doctor, I'm not nothing, but I think that we were very, very, very lucky, and maybe there will be an explanation in the coming years about why Africa did not get impacted the way the rest of the world were. I remember that when I grew up, I took a lot of hydroxychloroquines because of the malaria. Our parents are pumping it into us, and maybe it helped us, maybe it protected because it's widely done. I don't know, but I think that it really helped African populations, being in town or even those in the countries, to notice that there's a lot of lie that has been told to us, and we need to take care of ourselves in the first place. We can't wait for the government to distribute the masks, because they are never going to come, because corruption and because it's not going to happen. But if we want to survive, then let's take care of ourselves. And I think in that sense, COVID was quite helpful for African, to open the eyes of the people, to start putting people in front of their responsibilities, parents in front of their responsibility, to think, oh, it's not the state that is going to take care of my kids. I keep my kids at home because I don't want to send my kids back because they have not be prepared to receive the kids back in the school. And so, yeah.
People had to learn the lessons of owning responsibility for own life decisions, family, friends, and close, the ones who are close to us. So that was, I assume, one of the global lessons of COVID. So we have another last question for you coming from Jose. So he's saying, hi, Nathalie, how do you see the perspective of Africa closing its doors and opening it strictly to those countries that prove to be willing to work in a really win-win approach?
Well, I think that's what I say. I think it's the way forward. We should seize this opportunity given to us by COVID-19, where everybody in the world is actually thinking about what's best for me, to finally, eventually go there and say, okay, it's not like closing your borders and stuff like that, but let's enter into partnerships with people. And while we negotiate those partnerships, we tell them, okay, you want to have something that we have here, then you come and you we open a manufacturer together here, so that you win something and we win something in terms of know-how transfer, knowledge transfer, and acquisition of new technologies and stuff like that. We should seize that. That's a crucial time for the world. Everybody is rethinking their models at the state level. And the bad luck that we have in Africa is that most of our heads of states, especially in the Francophone part, are not thinking. They are just waiting that someone is giving them order. And it should be an opportunity for the population, for the people, to put pressure on these leaders and tell them, now you start working in our own interest. You see, during the pandemic, they closed the borders. They closed the borders like everybody in the world. But guess what? What happened? There was still Air France flight between African capitals and Paris, despite the borders on both sides being officially closed. But Air France continued to fly people in and out. Why would you allow some flights to come in from a country, France, who was devastated by the COVID at that time, compared to Cote d'Ivoire, to Gabon, to the figures that we had in Africa at that time, where the contaminated figures and the death figure were very low, and in France it was exploding. But you let people travel between as if you want to import the virus into your country, just because you are not driven by the will to protect your people, but by the will to obey to orders from others. And I think now is the time for African people, for African citizens, to put pressure on their leaders to say, do it as the rest of the world thinks what's best for us, our country first. And if you can't do it, then go away, move away.